Everyone's talking about the coming housing market crash of 2021 and how it's going to be the big reset of the economy, like something we've never seen before. Now, I gotta admit, I've walked down that road and thought there might be something to all the hype. But after closer analysis, I'm not so sure. After I pushed my emotions aside and did the math, I came up with 7 different reasons as to why the housing market is not going to crash in 2021. But if I'm wrong, and it does, it'll be because of one of 2 reasons, maybe both. And before we begin, click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell because I post cool stuff like this each and every week, and the sooner that you see, the sooner you'll be free. Let's go. Hi, my name is Matt Theriault, CEO of Epic Real Estate, and I help frustrated professionals shift from paychecks to profits by using more mind than money through creative financing to help them retire early. That's what we do here. But we're addressing a much bigger topic today, the housing market 2021 forecast. Specifically, I'm referring to the housing crash of 2021 that everyone is talking about. Yet, it's the housing crash that's not to be, and I'm gonna run down 7 different reasons as to why. And if I'm wrong, I'll tell you at the end the 2 reasons why that would be so. Number 1, population growth. The population represents the demand in the housing market. People need shelter. That ain't gonna change. Now, you'll hear the news constantly mention how the growth of the population is slowing down, of which is factual from a percentage perspective. But what's actual from a number perspective, the population is growing pretty darn fast. And particularly over the next decade, there's a bubble in the population between the ages of 30 and 40 years old. Now, this is significant because this is the age range where people will typically buy their first home. Then they'll go out into the world, make a few bucks, then they'll sell that home to upgrade to another. The demand to keep the housing market growing for the next 10 years, at least, it's already in place. 2, limited supply. Nationally, the housing supply was low prior to the pandemic, and it began to drop abruptly with intensity starting in April of this year. As of right now, there are only 130 homes in every 10,000 that are for sale. That's half the amount during normal times. You can see here we're at a historic low in supply. New home builders are responding to the demand with housing starts up 14% over this time last year. But we're looking at 9 to 12 months or so at best before new homes begin to increase the supply level. The housing supply has been underbuilt for over a decade and will likely take years of accelerated new home construction before that gap closes. 3, lending guidelines. Since the crash of 2007, the banks have tightened their guidelines significantly, and they've yet to ease up. I see it at Cashflow Savvy, 10 to 15 times per month, the amount of hoops buyers still have to jump through for bank loan approval. The last housing market crash was a result of high-risk lending. That doesn't exist today, because over the last 13 years, the banks have probably built their strongest books of business in history. So if you were looking for a relapse of high-risk predatory lending as a reason for a crash, don't count on it. It doesn't exist. If we're on the same page so far, let me know by smashing the like button. Number 4, parked money. To look at the history of the housing market, it wouldn't take a PhD to notice that we're in unprecedented times. Historically, market adjustments happen every 7 to 8 years, and that has been fairly predictable. Not this time though. We're just a year or so away from actually doubling this traditional growth period. We're seriously overdue for a downward market adjustment, and investors, they're hip to this. Many started taking money off the table years ago to build their cash reserves in anticipation of the next downturn opportunities. Further, smaller hedge funds witnessed the remarkable run monster hedge funds like Blackstone had when they were buying up seemingly every single family property they could, and they're waiting on the sidelines for that window to open again. There's a ton of money waiting to pounce on the next crash, which means it probably won't crash. Number 5, Trump derangement syndrome. Don't underestimate the hate for the orange man. Although it's appearing more and more by the day that Trump's days are indeed officially numbered, Trump derangement syndrome is real. Why? And will live on for a while. The Democrats will do everything they can to not be upstaged by Trump's fantastic track record on the economy over the last 4 years. It would be a Biden embarrassment if the housing market were to crash on his watch. Although he'd probably blame that on Trump too. Nonetheless, Democrats will support homeowners and tenants through various moratoriums and stimulus. Several states have already extended the eviction moratorium into 2021, my state, Nevada, being one of them. And more loan forbearance will almost assuredly follow suit to prevent a housing market collapse. Number 6, slow foreclosures. If the Biden administration fails to support the housing market through moratoriums, forbearance, and stimulus programs, there won't be a rush to force people out of their homes, as the optics for the Democrats would be insurmountable and leave a wide opening for the next Republican presidential opponent come next election. And this is important to note. The total number of loans in forbearance is 2.8 million as of this month, as of right now. And this number has been generally declining. During the 2007 housing market crash, the number of delinquent loans surpassed 10 million. Essentially, 3 times what we could be dealing with when forbearances expire in 2021. Not nearly as big of a deal as it was in 2007. 7, high equity. And you can see here the growth in the Case-Shiller Home Price Index. We've seen the skyrocketing prices this year. And for those homeowners that decided to stay put, they've got equity. Lots of it. It would take a huge crash for this equity to disappear. And a housing market crash like that has only happened once, ever. And when it did happen, it took almost 5 years for it to hit bottom. And because of this, or any one of these 7 reasons, or any combination of them, we're not going to see a housing market crash in 2021. If I'm wrong though, it would likely be for one of or both of these reasons, of which I think are very much in the realm of possibility, but not likely to happen quick enough to cause a crash in 2021. But they are real and plausible. Number 1, the unknown. For example, this time last year, nobody saw a pandemic coming that would impact the global economy to the extent that COVID has. Nor did anyone see coming the tragic murder of George Floyd and the social disruption that ensued. And nobody saw the impact that these 2 events happening simultaneously would inflict on the economy. And then, these 2 combined in the midst of an election year? Nobody predicted this. And then to only be fueled by polarizing non-stop media coverage. As they say in the news business, if it bleeds, it leads. And mainstream media smelled blood. And they jumped all over this with their daily dousing of gasoline on the dumpster fire that 2020 has been. And it was all amplified by a tidal wave of social media coverage. What would have 2020 looked like if it weren't for mainstream media? They are as culpable as any Republican or any Democrat for the current state of the US. Personally, I'd say even more so. 2020 has been a perfect storm of chaos. But could it get worse? That's the unknown I'm speaking of. We don't know. It's almost as if a new year with no more surprises would be a huge surprise. Here's where I'm going with this. You see, during the buildup to the 2007 housing market crash, we, as a society, had no idea what was going on behind the scenes of the lending industry. And for the small number of those that were privy to the predatory lending practices and the fraudulent sales of mortgages on the secondary market, even they had no idea to what extent, nor did anyone foresee the ramifications that would follow. Right now, with the benefit of hindsight, it's crystal clear what happened. And you ask yourself, how could it have ended up any other way? It's common sense now, isn't it? But at the time, we didn't know. And given the extraordinary times we're living in right now, what else don't we know? It doesn't seem impossible for something to be lurking in the shadows that could at any given moment just jump out and bite us again. Not impossible. It's possible. Now, the second thing that could cause a housing market crash is flying well above the radar. It's been exposed to the masses this year, and it seems to get bigger by the day. And that's number 2, the Socialist Agenda. One of the more alarming advancements of recent years has been a growing enthusiasm for socialism, especially among millennials and Gen Zers. Polls indicate that upwards of 70% of people in these age groups favor socialism. And these 2 generations make up 42.3% of the current population, and they are a voting force to be reckoned with. Capitalism is their enemy. Herding all of the greedy real estate investors into a small stable, branding them with a scarlet letter, and seizing their properties wouldn't be enough to satisfy today's blossoming socialist. It'd just be a good start. The population of socialism is largely due to the notion that, under socialism, the things we want, college education, healthcare, and housing, would be free of charge. Sounds good, but not until you discover who's going to pay for it and what other things you'd have to give up to make it happen, like your freedom. Freedom of your personal property rights, as an example for our context here. In a socialist economy, the government owns and controls the means of production. Personal property is sometimes allowed, but really only in the form of consumer goods. And if you think this happening here in the US is a far-fetched idea, let's take a quick look. One of the House Democrats' more recent socialist schemes, the Land and Water Conservation Fund Permanent Funding Act. As the bill makes its way through the House, if passed, it would mandate permanent funding of $900 million to the Land and Water Conservation Fund each year, which sounds like a good thing. Who's not for conserving our land and water? If passed, however, this would be a colossal 2.5 times increase of the fund's average annual expenditures over the past 15 years. That's a lot of money, but still a good cause though, right? Here's the real deal. The fund's main activity is not to necessarily conserve land and water, but rather to gobble up private land and put it under government ownership, management, and political control. In other words, nationalizing real estate. Oh, come on, Matt, you're reaching for this one. The term permanent funding is right in the title of the bill. Permanent. The gobbling of land won't stop until there's nothing left to gobble. All right, let's look at another one. The Green New Deal, introduced and championed by House Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Like the previous act's title, this one too sounds like a good thing. I mean, clean air, clean water, renewable energy, preserve the ozone layer. Who's not for those things? The Green New Deal, however, addresses much more than these environmental issues. It's a Trojan horse, so to speak, for every single significant social agenda item of the last 2 decades, including housing for all, while eliminating all foreclosures and evictions. Has that trial balloon not already been sent up this year? Are confiscations of privately held properties next? How slippery of a slope are we standing on?
I like to say very bluntly, our mission is to redistribute wealth. A lot of people bristle at that phrase. That is, in fact, the phrase we need to use.
They're not trying to keep this a secret. That was said just this week. Private property rights are being tested right now. Rent control has been around for a while at the city level, but in 2019, the governor of Oregon, Kate Brown, made history signing into law the nation's first statewide rent control act. Could national rent control be next? Now, so far, today's socialists aren't advocating that all private property ownership be eliminated, but rather that the gap between the haves and have-nots just be closed and preventing accumulation. A new law signed into California just this past September will restrict anyone selling foreclosed homes from bundling them at auction for sale to a single buyer. So, we have rent control dictating what you can charge someone to use your personal property. And with this new law, it's dictated how you can sell your personal property. Now, this newer California law passed in November. This should seriously alarm you. This new law made foreclosed homes easier to buy, as long as you're not a landlord or flipper. And you may be thinking, good, give others a chance. Well, stand by. This new rule applies to residential properties sold at foreclosure auctions. And it works like this. If an investor wins one of those homes at auction, then people who want to live in it, as well as nonprofit organizations and government entities, get 45 days to submit competing offers. Another one of those laws that sounds really good on the surface, right? Who's going to argue against resident owners and nonprofits getting a level playing field at an auction? Nobody. But the Socialist Republic of California put themselves on that same playing field via government entities to play against the resident owners and nonprofits. If the state wants the property, will resident owners and nonprofits even be able to compete at the auction? It doesn't sound like anything has changed for them at all. In short, California kicked out investors of the foreclosure auctions to make room for themselves. It's kind of like how running numbers is against the law for you and me to do, but it's okay for the government to run their lotteries as long as it's in the name of funding the school system. And we all know how that's played out for public education. Big government is making a run on your real estate, among your other freedoms. Not likely to bring the market down in 2021, but it is happening. Share with me in the comments where you agree and where you disagree, and try to do it without using Trump's or Biden's names. Let's make a game out of it. And feel free to share this with someone you think may find it valuable. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.